Hello, everybody. My name is Ryan McNeil, and this is the Builder by Day podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. Today's topic, it's a little heavy. So before I dive in, I want to take a minute to explain how I put together this particular episode and how I approach really any episode like this where the subject matter is serious and it deserves real attention and I believe professionalism. When I talk about stuff like this, topics that matter, I take time to write out what I want to say. I do my research. I use Google and AI. I look up articles and stats and history, not just to make my point, but to check myself. And I want to feel confident that what I'm saying isn't just my personal opinion floating around in my head. It needs to be backed up, and I want it to be thought through, and I want it to hold water. And I do that for a couple of reasons. The first reason is I am passionate about these things, but I also know myself. And I know that if I just sit down, I hit record, and I start talking about something that gets me fired up, it's pretty easy for that passion to take over, and this thing turns into a cursing, swearing rant. And while that may be entertaining for some people, it's not really what I'm going for. I want this stuff to land. I want it to reach people. And to do that, it needs to be clear and structured, and it needs to be grounded in truth. The second reason is, as any of you know who follow my channel or have listened to any of my stuff, I'm not a professional speaker. I'm not a YouTuber by trade. I'm not a public figure. I'm a home builder. I'm a regular guy who happens to have a YouTube channel and a podcast, and that is a totally different scenario, but I still take it seriously. I don't do anything half-assed, and especially if I'm going to put my face on it. If I'm going to speak in this camera and talk about something that matters, I want to make sure that I do it right. So I treat episodes like this the same way I would treat a speech if I were giving a speech to a room full of people. I write it down, I read it, I adjust it, I read it again, I proofread it, I polish it, but I don't memorize it. And because I don't memorize it, I refer to my notes and I read through it. I'm not doing this full time. I don't pretend to be something I'm not, but I do aim to be thoughtful, clear, and accurate with anything like this that I present. And when I record these episodes, I read them from a script that I've written and rewritten and polished and proofread. And I look up when I can, but my goal always is to seek and speak the truth as best I can. And that's what this is about today. Now, before I get into the meat of this episode, I want to make it very clear where I'm coming from so that nobody misunderstands what this is. I'm, of course, not a preacher or a theologian or any kind of religious expert. I'm just a regular guy, a Canadian citizen who believes in freedom and community and decency and, yes, Christianity. Now, I'm certainly not what you would call a hardcore Christian, but I keep my membership active, if you know what I mean. I don't claim to have all the answers, and I probably don't fit into whatever box people think of when they hear the word Christian, but I do believe. And more importantly, I believe in what Christianity gave us. I believe in the moral structure it built and the world that it made possible, and that's what I'm talking about here today. This episode isn't about religion in the personal, spiritual sense. This isn't about whether you believe in God or you go to church or you pray a certain way. I'm not telling anyone what they have to believe. What I'm saying is you cannot pretend that Christianity didn't shape this country, and you cannot ignore what's happening to it now. Because whether you like it or not, Christianity is under attack in Canada. And I'm not saying that to be dramatic. I'm being honest. Churches are being burned. Christian speakers are being banned. Christian beliefs are being labeled hateful, not just debated, but flat out rejected from public life. And the people cheering this on have no idea what they are destroying. They've been taught that Christianity is just some oppressive thing from the past, that it's old-fashioned, that it's exclusive and harmful. And maybe in some cases, they've had a bad experience. But that doesn't justify torching the whole foundation, because the foundation is where everything we depend on actually came from. So that's what this episode is about. It's not about forcing anyone to believe or pushing faith on people. It's about protecting what is still here and waking up to what we're losing if we don't start speaking up. This isn't about worship. It's about survival of a culture and a country and a moral framework that kept chaos at bay. But that chaos is getting a lot louder lately. So let's start with the numbers. Let's start with the data that shows what's really happening. In 2001, roughly 77% of Canadians identified as Christian. In the 1980s, that number was closer to 90%. By 2021, that number dropped to just over 53%. That's a 24-point collapse in one generation. And among younger Canadians, it's even lower. In some cities, Christianity is already a minority faith, and in cultural influence, it is lower still. You see, we've gone from mostly Christian to Christianity optional to now Christianity unwanted. And if it was just that fewer people were going to church, fine. That's part of life. Beliefs change, habits evolve. But that's not what this is. This is active hostility. This is people being told to sit down and shut up and get out of the way because their beliefs are dangerous now. Look at the public space. Look at government buildings, schools, universities. You'll find flags, symbols, posters for every cause under the sun except Christianity. The one worldview you are not allowed to reference. That's the one tradition that gets zero accommodation, zero promotion, and often zero tolerance. You can celebrate Ramadan at a public school, you can raise a pride flag at City Hall, and you can host drag story time for toddlers in a public library. But don't dare say a prayer before a council meeting, or quote scripture on social media, or host a worship concert in a public venue. Those things will get you canceled and labeled and attacked. That's the environment that we live in now. The double standard is the issue because what's being pushed out isn't just personal belief. It's the cultural framework that made the freedoms possible in the first place. The decline isn't just spiritual, it's structural. We have decided as a country to walk away from the values that built this place. And the deeper we get into that decision, the more chaotic and confused and divided we become. You can see it in the data on mental health and on family breakdown, on crime. The old rules are gone, and the new ones change every 5 minutes. When you strip away a shared moral framework, something will always fill that void. And right now it's rage and identity politics and tribalism and state-sponsored ideology. That's what we're replacing Christianity with. And that is not an upgrade. So we've talked about the decline and how fast it's unraveling. But let's take a second to remind ourselves what's actually being lost here. Like, what did Christianity build? What was the foundation really made of? Because again, I am not talking about religion in the personal sense. I'm not talking about salvation or what you believe about heaven or whether you go to church on Sunday. I'm talking about the civilizational framework that Christianity gave us. The real, tangible stuff that makes a country work. Let's start with something obvious. Hospitals. Most of the major hospitals in Canada are Christian founded. St. Michael's, St. Joseph, Mount Sinai, Grace Hospital. These were built by nuns and priests and churches, people who believed they had a duty to care for the sick, not because it made money, not because there was a government mandate, but because their faith demanded compassion and service. Then you've got education. Our first schools were run by churches. Our first universities like McGill, King's College, St. Francis Xavier, these were all rooted in Christian theology and moral instruction. The idea that knowledge matters because truth matters, and that truth is grounded in something higher than just your own personal opinion. Now add to that the social safety net, orphanages, soup kitchens, shelters, addiction recovery programs. Almost all of it was built and run by Christian organizations. And even today, a massive chunk of charitable work in this country still comes from churches and faith-based groups. Whether it's feeding people, housing them, clothing them, or walking them through recovery, Christians have been doing that work since before Canada was even a country. And perhaps most importantly, our legal system. Our laws, our entire concept of justice comes from a Christian worldview. The idea that human life is sacred and that we all have equal worth, that we shouldn't lie, cheat, steal, or murder. These aren't just legal rules. These are moral convictions, and they come from Scripture. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms even begins with the words, "Whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law." That is in our foundational document. Now, maybe somebody hears all this and says, yeah, but we could have done those things anyway, with or without religion. And I would say to that, show me where. Show me a society that built those same institutions, hospitals, schools, courts, charities, without any Christian influence. Because I haven't seen one. And these weren't just random developments. These were rooted in a worldview that believed in dignity and truth and service, in the idea that every person matters because they were made in the image of God. And of course, I'm not saying only Christians do good things, and I'm not saying non-believers are bad people. What I'm saying is that the society we have all inherited, the rights, the protections, the stability, it all came from Christianity. It didn't just appear out of thin air. It was built, and it was built on purpose. And now that foundation is crumbling and we're pretending we can just sort of patch it up with a few hashtags and diversity slogans and vague ideas about kindness. And it's not working because there's no structure behind it. We shouldn't be ashamed to say that Christianity built something worth preserving. I think we should be honest about that. I think we should be grateful for it. And I think it's time we start defending it before the people who don't understand it and don't value it finish tearing it all down. When I talk about Christianity in this conversation, I'm not talking about the religion in the traditional sense, the worship, the faith, the hymns and sermons and theology. I'm not here to debate who goes to heaven or whether you need to be baptized or any of that. That's not today's topic. I do think faith is important. Personally, I do believe, but that's a separate conversation. That's a philosophical and spiritual conversation, and that's for another day. What I'm talking about today is Christianity as the foundation of the Western world. The values, the principles, the laws, the way we treat each other, the reason we even have concepts like individual rights or moral boundaries. It's not about belief. It's about structure. I'm not saying anyone has to be a Christian. I'm not saying you have to go to church. I don't care what you believe in your own head or in your own home. But what you don't get to do is you don't get to destroy the foundation of the society you live in just because you don't believe. I'm talking about basic things here, like don't murder anyone, don't steal, don't sleep with somebody else's spouse, help the weak, protect children, be honest, work hard, treat people with dignity. Those aren't just random rules. That's not universal humanism. Those are Christian values that form the spine of Western legal and cultural world. And no, they don't just come from common sense. Show me another system that built a country like this. Show me any other religion or even non-religion being practiced here that produced this kind of moral framework. And I would be the first one to say, well, then great, let's welcome that. But let's be honest here. There is no other system doing that. The God part, whether or not you believe in a higher power, it's not the point here. In a very crude analogy, it's kind of like Santa Claus. And I don't say that to mock or offend anyone. I say it to explain this very simply. When you were a kid, Santa Claus works because it's a story about consequences. If you're good, you'll be rewarded. If you're bad, there are consequences. And most importantly, somebody's always watching. And that's a story that provides structure and morality and guidance and restraint. And for those who believe it, it also provides joy and hope and happiness. And Christianity offered that same kind of compass for many, many generations. When you strip that away, when you remove accountability and you let human beings do whatever they want to do with no fear of consequences, there are always those who will do exactly that. Look at the places in the world that are hard to live in. The corrupt, violent, and dangerous places. There's not a lot of Christianity operating in those systems. Not a lot of Jesus in the courts and leadership, if you know what I mean. And not a lot of Jesus and Christianity in the homes either. So again, I'm not defending Christianity as a belief system today. I'm defending it as a civilization system. And you can't argue that it's not under attack. You can't argue that churches aren't being burned or that Christian music events aren't being shut down or that Christianity is the only worldview being excluded from public life. If you're denying that, honestly, I'm not even talking to you. You're not a serious person. You're living in a fantasy dream world. But if you do see it, and if you just don't care because you're not a Christian, well, that's a different conversation because you still live here. And if you live here, you should care about what kind of moral and cultural structure this country is built on. If you don't like Christianity, fine. You don't believe in God, that's fine. But what system do you want instead? What are you offering in its place? Show me an atheist country you would actually want to live in. Just one. Now let's move on from the philosophical to the physical, because this isn't just about ideas and cultural wars. This is about real attacks on real places of worship. This is about churches being burned to the ground in Canada. Between May 2021 and the end of 2023, there were 33 churches burned by fire. And of those, 24 were confirmed arson. Only 2 of them were ruled accidental. And that's not a coincidence or a fluke. That's a pattern. And if it were 33 mosques or 33 synagogues or even 33 Starbucks locations, this country would have been in an absolute meltdown. It would have been declared a national emergency. But because they're Christian churches, the silence is deafening. It's not one denomination either. These attacks have happened to Catholic churches and Anglican churches, evangelical churches, indigenous churches, rural and urban, old and new, from BC to Nova Scotia. No region has been immune, and no community has been spared. And here's where it gets even more frustrating. The moment you bring this up, someone jumps in and says, yeah, but that's because of all the residential school legacy. Look, I agree that was a dark chapter in Canadian history, and yes, churches were involved. But let's not pretend that burning down churches is justice. It's arson and hate. And a lot of Indigenous leaders, including people who actually survived those schools, have said exactly the same thing. They've called these attacks criminal. They've said this isn't how reconciliation works, and they're right. By the way, thousands of Indigenous Canadians are Christians and proudly practice the faith. You should look into it if you don't know that. You may be surprised to learn just how many. Christianity is the only religion in this country that is socially acceptable to attack in public. You can mock it, vandalize it, threaten it, and barely anybody blinks. And in some circles, they'll even cheer you on. And that is not progress or healing. That is the deliberate cultural dismantling of the very thing that built this country in the first place. If people were firebombing mosques, the response would be immediate. Condemnation, headlines, and politicians holding press conferences. And rightfully so, because it's obviously wrong to attack a place of worship, but for some reason, when it's a church, everybody shrugs, or worse yet, they try to justify it. If we're going to be a country that claims to value tolerance, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, then that has to apply to everyone, including Christians, especially Christians. Because right now, they're the ones taking all the hits and getting none of the protection. And if you're going to have an honest conversation about who we are and what kind of society we want to build, then this silence and double standard cannot continue. Now let's get into some more recent stuff, and specifically this whole situation with Sean Foyt. Now I'm not going to lay it all out for you here today. If you haven't looked into it, just Google it, look into it. But this situation right here is a perfect example of everything we've been talking about so far. The hostility, the double standards, the outright censorship, it is all there. Now, I also want to be very clear about something here. I have never heard of Sean Foyt until last week. I'm not a super fan. I don't know what church he goes to. I'm not part of his church. I don't know his music. I have no stake in this guy whatsoever. The only reason I even know he exists is because last week, the media told me I'm supposed to hate him. They told me he was far right and that he's hateful and that he shouldn't be allowed to perform in Canadian cities. And I thought, okay, well, what the hell did this guy do? So I looked it up. I wanted to know. I expected to find some bombshell, something totally disqualifying. But there was nothing. Just a Christian musician who talks about Jesus, sings worship songs, and yes, he believes in traditional Christian values. He believes in life. He believes in marriage as it was defined for the past 2,000 years. That's it. No violence, no incitement, no threats, just beliefs. The same beliefs that built this country. But his concerts were being canceled. His venues were being backed out. Protests were being organized. Politicians were tweeting about him. Media outlets were slandering him. All because he's what? Too Christian? Let me ask you this. Would we cancel a Muslim artist because they didn't support gay marriage? Or would we cancel a Sikh speaker because they were opposed to abortion? No, of course we wouldn't. And we shouldn't, because we're supposed to live in a country where you can have a belief, even an unpopular belief, and still be allowed to speak it. But apparently, not if you're Christian. And then the rhetoric started to get even more extreme. People online were calling him a fascist, and others were saying he should go back to the US. And some people were even saying they hope he dies. I'm not exaggerating that. That's how insane this got over a Christian coming here to perform worship concerts. And again, these people didn't even know who this guy was 10 minutes ago. They just got the signal and the mob got activated. And because it's 2025 in Canada, that's all it takes is the label of Christian, and then you're guilty until proven canceled. Now imagine if that shoe were on the other foot. Imagine if a Christian mob tried to cancel a gay performing artist because of their beliefs. Imagine if a Christian politician said they don't want that kind of ideology in their city. It would be national news. The outrage would be everywhere, but because it's a Christian being attacked, it's crickets. Or worse yet, it's celebration. And here's what really bothers people about someone like Sean Foyt. He's not apologizing. He's not backing down. He's not watering down his message. And in a world that demands conformity, that kind of boldness, especially from a Christian, is seen as dangerous. But it's not dangerous. It's just rare. And frankly, we need a lot more of it. Because whether or not you agree with everything he says, the fact that we now cancel Christian musicians for holding Christian beliefs should terrify you. Not because you're a fan of the guy, but because if they can come for him, then they can come for anyone. This isn't about music, it's about a message. And the message is clear. Christianity is no longer welcome in the public square. And the more polite and quiet we are about it, the faster they will push us all the way out. Let's talk about the political side of this. Because if you think this attack on Christianity is just coming from random internet trolls or a few angry activists, you are not paying attention. It's coming from the top, from politicians, journalists, and government-funded media, from the people who shape public opinion and policy. It is now socially and politically acceptable in Canada to speak about Christians in ways that would never be tolerated if directed at any other group, period. You can mock them, stereotype them, misrepresent them, label them as bigots, fascists, extremists, and nobody blinks. Nobody pushes back. In fact, half the time, the government is the one doing it. Look at how Christian protesters are treated compared to literally anyone else. You can block a highway to protest climate change and nobody stops you. You can vandalize and destroy historic monuments and people will cheer you on. You can march through downtown Toronto waving foreign flags and shouting slogans that openly support terrorist groups, and the government will call it diversity. But a Christian group holds a worship concert in a church, and the mob activates to cancel him, fine him, and have him removed from the country. You also see it in the language they use. Words like anti-choice and anti-LGBTQ, far-right Christian nationalism, and these labels, once they're out there, they stick. You don't even have to say anything extreme. You just have to believe the wrong thing. You believe what Christians have always believed, and suddenly you're dangerous. You're a threat to democracy. You're not Canadian enough. The media fans the flames constantly. The CBC, Global, CTV, these people are the worst. And they love nothing more than to find some obscure fringe example and then pretend it represents all Christians. They frame it like the country is under siege from Christian extremists, when in reality, Christians are the only group in this country that do not have full protection. They're the ones getting their events canceled and being censored online. They're the ones whose churches are burning down and getting no attention from politicians. Imagine that being any other religion. Imagine the CBC pushing an article warning that a political movement was too Muslim or too Sikh. They wouldn't dare. But with Christianity, all bets are off. And I'm not asking for special treatment here. I'm not saying Christians should be given a free pass or not be criticized. What I'm saying is apply the same standard. Treat Christians with the same respect and protection you claim to extend to everybody else. If you're going to have hate speech laws, apply them equally. If you're going to preach tolerance, then practice it. But we all know that that is not happening. We're in a weird moment where every group is celebrated except the one that built the country. And it's not just erasure anymore, it's outright hostility. And when that hostility comes from the mouths of elected officials and media institutions, it is very dangerous because it tells the public these people don't count and these beliefs aren't welcome. And once a society decides that certain values, foundational values, are no longer acceptable to speak out loud, you're not in a democracy anymore. You're in a controlled culture where the people in charge decide what truths are allowed and which ones are punished. So yes, politics matter here, and media matters. And right now, they're doing everything they can to make sure Christianity is the thing we all learn to fear and forget. So after everything we've laid out here, the numbers, the erasure, the mockery, the attacks, we need to take a step back and ask, what are we actually losing here? Because this isn't just about burned buildings or canceled concerts or social media mobs. What we're losing is something deeper, something cultural and moral, something we may not even fully realize we had until it's gone. We're losing the glue, the shared understanding that made us neighbors, not just people who live near each other, the common values that allowed us to walk into a room full of strangers and still feel like we were playing by the same rules. Things like tell the truth and keep your word and respect your elders and look after children. That wasn't partisan. That was just how people lived. It was understood and it was expected, and it didn't come out of nowhere. It came from Christian ethics, passed down from generation after generation, and whether you were religious or not. But now it's all up for grabs, and everything's subjective, and everything's political, and everything is somebody else's fault, and we've traded accountability for victimhood, and we've replaced moral clarity with basically whatever feels right to you. And then we wonder why this country feels like it is coming apart at the seams. And unfortunately, there's something else very important that we're losing: courage. The kind of courage that used to come from believing there was something higher than yourself, that there's truth, even if it's unpopular, and that there is right and wrong. And even if the crowd disagrees, without that, you don't get moral heroes anymore. We just get influencers. We're losing beauty too. Just look around. Look at the architecture. Look at art. Look at music. Look at the way people dress, the way they talk, the way they behave in public, and how they treat each other. Nothing is elevated. Nothing is good in a deeper sense. And a lot of that came from Christianity, from the idea that we were creating for something greater than ourselves. We're also losing the ability to disagree peacefully. You used to be able to say, hey, I don't believe what you believe, but I respect you. And now, if you disagree with the modern script on gender or family or parenting or anything, you're not just wrong, you're evil. You're a threat. You're dehumanized. That didn't happen when Christianity had a stronger cultural presence, because forgiveness and humility and restraint were seen as virtues. When you remove the moral framework that Christianity gave us, something else fills the gap. And that something else is usually a whole lot worse. And it's not like people have actually stopped being religious. They just switched religions. Now they worship politics. They worship identity. They worship the climate. And they worship themselves. They don't promote mercy or grace or service. They demand loyalty, and they demand outrage, and they demand that you pick a side and you dehumanize the other and you stay angry forever. That's what we're losing. And if we're not careful, if we don't start defending what's still here, we're going to wake up in a country that we don't even recognize anymore. One where you can't say what you believe, and you can't raise your children the way you want. And you can't even speak the truth out loud without risk of losing your job or your reputation. And it's not too late, but the silence has to end and the cowardice has to go. Because if we don't speak up for what built this country, we are going to watch it disappear. Now, maybe you've been listening to all this and thinking, okay, but I'm not Christian, so this doesn't really affect me. And that's where I think a lot of people are getting this wrong. This isn't about whether or not you go to church. It's not about what you personally believe. This is about the foundation, the structure of the country you live in, the culture you benefit from, the stability you probably take for granted, and whether you realize it or not, you are living off the interest of Christian inheritance. You don't have to be religious to want a society that works. You don't have to be a believer to appreciate order and safety and decency and freedom. Those things didn't just evolve naturally. They were built by people who believed in something higher than themselves. They were built by Christians. I'm not saying Christians have always got it right, but that doesn't erase the framework. That doesn't erase what was built. When Christianity fades, when we tear it out of public life, out of education, out of leadership, out of family, it's not just Christians who lose. Everybody loses, because we all lose access to the values that used to anchor us. Things like grace and forgiveness, charity, duty, discipline, self-restraint, the belief that truth matters even when it's unpopular. Those are not default human settings. Those are learned values. And if we stop teaching them, stop reinforcing them, stop modeling them, they will vanish. And then you end up with a country full of people who are completely free, but totally lost. People say we can just be good without religion. Okay, prove it. Show me where that's working. Show me a society that walked away from its moral roots and ended up more unified, more peaceful, and more free. Because that's not what I'm seeing. What I'm seeing is the opposite. We have children in total crisis, depression, anxiety, identity confusion, all of these things skyrocketing. You've got families falling apart, marriage rates collapsing, birth rates dropping, more loneliness, addiction, and suicide, and yet we're more tolerant and open than ever before. We traded God for TikTok, and we traded moral wisdom for vibes and slogans, and now everyone's depressed and angry and looking for somebody to blame. This isn't just a Christian issue anymore. This is a civilizational issue. The people trying to erase Christianity don't have anything better to replace it with. There's no guiding philosophy. There are no real values. It's just endless outrage and demands for compliance. And eventually, that affects everyone, because eventually the values go, and then the freedoms go, and then the country goes. So if you're not a Christian, even if you've never set foot in a church, you should be paying attention, because when the moral framework collapses, it doesn't just collapse on the believers, it collapses on all of us. This fight is not just about faith, it's about freedom. So where do we go from here? It's easy to rant and list everything that's broken. It's easy to get pissed off. And honestly, there is a lot to be pissed off about. But the question is, now what? What does this mean for regular people like you and me who are just trying to live decent lives and raise families and build communities and not lose their minds while everything around us seems to be collapsing? Well, for what it's worth, here's what I think. We have to stop waiting for permission. We have to stop being quiet. We have to stop letting people treat Christian values like some outdated, dangerous idea that needs to be hidden. Because the truth is, we don't need to be ashamed of the values that built this country. We should be proud of them. That doesn't mean screaming at people, and it doesn't mean trying to convert strangers at the grocery store. It just means living out your convictions clearly, confidently, and unapologetically. It means speaking up when something is wrong. It means refusing to play along when culture starts demanding that 2 + 2 = 5. It means saying no without flinching. You don't have to be loud, but you do have to be clear. Because the other side, the people tearing this stuff down, they are not shy. They are organized and they're vocal. And most importantly, they are relentless. They don't care if you're polite. They don't care if you try to find middle ground. They want it all gone, and they will keep pushing until there is nothing left standing. And I understand that most Christians are not confrontational by nature. That's actually part of the problem. We've got too many polite, quiet, go along to get along people who don't want to cause waves. But that approach is done. It's over. That's how we got ourselves into this mess. Because while we were being polite, they were rewriting the rules and focused on taking control. And while we were trying not to offend anyone, they were making sure that we weren't even allowed to speak anymore. It's not about being angry. It's about being awake. It's about knowing what we're standing on and refusing to let it be taken away from us. So where do we go from here? Well, start remembering who we are. We remember where we came from, and we stop apologizing for being shaped by something good, and we make it very clear that we are not going anywhere. Christianity doesn't need to be saved, but this country definitely does. And the only way to save it is to stop pretending we can rebuild civilization without the foundation that built it in the first place. I'm not here to convert anyone. I'm not here to debate theology. I'm just here to say what a lot of people already know, but unfortunately are too afraid to say out loud. Christian values are not the problem, and Christianity is not the threat. But the loss of those values and the loss of Christianity is absolutely a threat. And if you care about truth and freedom, and if you care about the future, then you better care about defending it. Because make no mistake, our future is under attack. My name is Ryan McNeil. I'm just a builder by day.